This little camera seems to have taken the world by storm. And rightfully so, it's a real video production workhorse.
Work. W-E-R-K.
I don't really buy into the cinema line marketing. For me, this camera is for solo shooters who value reliability and utility above all else. And Sony got it so right with this camera right from the get-go. And kudos to them for supporting it and adding pretty major features via firmware updates. That being said, Sony never addressed this camera's Achilles heel, which I will talk about towards the end of the video. And incidentally, a word of warning. I'll be taking a huge dump all over this camera, so consider this a disclaimer. I love the FX6. I've been working with it for over 2 years now, and it's 95% of the way to the perfect camera for me. And I wouldn't trade it for any other camera under $20,000. And it's only those last 5% that infuriate me so. So consider this either a long-term review or my wishlist for the FX6 Mark II. Now, whether Sony is planning on making a Mark II is anyone's guess. They did put out Mark II versions of both the FS5 and the FS7, both with major hardware and software improvements, so it's not out of the realm of possibility. And with that in mind, let's tear this baby down. The first area I would like to see improved is build quality. Now, to be fair, nothing actually broke on my camera, but the moving parts don't inspire much confidence. The worst offender is of course play. I've been in the FX6 Facebook group for years now, and not a day goes by without some new owner coming in and asking if that much play in the handle is normal, because it shouldn't be normal. Oh, and by the way, if you have a mic mounted on top, it picks up that sound really well, which is annoying. HDMI port also has a ton of play right out of the box. Same goes for the power connector. By the way, props to Sony for including the AC adapter in the box. Canon doesn't do that, for example. But God, could you make this a Limo or Hiroshi locking connector? The headphone jack is connected so close to the power switch that I turned off the camera a couple of times just pulling the cable out.
That's what she said. Don't you dare.
And this multifunctional dial was misbehaving right out of the box. If you scroll it with your thumb, it scrolls both directions and the menu jumps around, not going anywhere. So you have to lightly press it and scroll it really slowly. I'm not sure if they fixed it in the later batches, but a lot of people on the Facebook group have the same issue. The Facebook group is also full of people with broken microphone mounts. This part is just terrible. First of all, what kind of a diameter is that? Is Sony compensating for something? At least include a spacer in the box for people with normal-ass microphones. The whole part is squeaky and supported by 2 tiny screws in a thin piece of some soft metal. This mount should be removed ASAP. You know, I'm an ex-Canon guy. I just miss the rock-solid feel of a Canon camera. And I also love the fact that Canon didn't have this maniacal need to miniaturize everything. And the FX6, I feel, is too damn small for its own good. When it's stripped down, it looks almost like a toy in my hands. There just isn't enough surface area to operate the camera comfortably. The buttons feel cramped, and after 2 years I still have to look what I press most of the time. And the buttons themselves are flat and mushy, they don't have a great feedback, and they are not illuminated. And the I/O area is just extremely cramped. With all of the cables attached, it's nearly impossible to get a grip on a cable to remove it. Removing port covers helps the issue a bit, but still. And having the cards pop out towards the back is a pain too. It's too cramped in there, especially with a V-mount attached to stick your fingers in there. And the cards don't pop out far enough. I just wish the cards popped out of the side like on Canon cameras. I just feel like if this camera was 30% bigger, none of this would be a problem. And it would be easier to shoulder mount. FX6 is uncomfortable to shoot with from the shoulder because of how damn small it is and the lack of a proper viewfinder. For me, the perfect form factor would be something like Canon C500 Mark II. Just the perfect size and an absolute tank. I have many issues with Canon, but build quality was never one of them. Monitor is the main human interface with the camera. seeing what you are shooting is kind of a big deal, don't you think? And when you buy a $6,000 camera and get this piece of crap as a monitor, it just feels like a sucker punch. Especially when any Chinese knockoff is bigger and brighter and will run you like $100. This is a 3.5-inch 720p display with 500 nits of brightness that is cluttered with overlays, and you're expected to pull focus and judge exposure on a full-frame 4K cinema camera in broad daylight? With this? Cinema camera my ass. I almost never run this useless thing unless I need touch to focus for some reason. And it beats me why Sony didn't include a port cover for this thing. They do provide a nifty cover for the top handle port, but not this. Well, gaff tape it is then. The monitor mount is equally as laughable. Whoever designed this thing must be sent back to design school. It's actually so bad that it spawned a whole market of accessories aimed at fixing this saggy mount. I feel like nowadays, video cameras should come with a 5-inch 1080p display as a standard, especially considering how cheap they are. And why Sony doesn't sell a proper proprietary viewfinder is beyond me. I would gladly pay $1,000 for a single cable viewfinder for this camera if Sony actually made one. It's just money asking to be made. And wrapping up the discussion on the body and the accessories, I just want to say that Sony was lazy with this camera. They just copy-pasted the same old cheap accessories from the FS5 and called it a day. They didn't upgrade or innovate the accessories at all. And they look and they feel last gen. I could forgive a Blackmagic camera, but not this. This is a premium Sony camera and it doesn't feel up to par. So whatever the next iteration of this camera is, it needs to be rock solid. Otherwise, as a working professional, I'm not interested. Another thing that Sony just copy-pasted from the old PXW line is the menu system. Sony is just bad at UI, no way around it. And there are two main reasons why. Cameras have been around for some time, and there's industry standard terminology for most of the camera settings. But Sony, it seems, is either living on another planet or is trying to reinvent the wheel. I mean, who in their right mind would call a playback button thumbnail? Instead of AWB, auto white balance, they have ATR, auto tracing white. And instead of black balancing or black shading, they have APR, automatic pixel restoration. Resolution they call video format, and so on and so forth. There are even blatant mistakes. Instead of user bits, they call it user's bit. No idea why I know how this ancient tech is supposed to be called and Sony doesn't. Embarrassing stuff, really. Sony really needs to hire some English-speaking people with industry experience to design their menus. So the second issue is how the menus are structured. Now, I have no qualms about the amount of settings Sony offers. That's always a good thing. But intuiting where to find a particular setting on this camera is always a challenge. Sony uses their own weird logic to scatter the settings all around the menu. For instance, why are card recording modes located in the project menu and not in the media menu where you would expect to find them? Why is HDMI rec control not in the same menu with the rest of HDMI controls? Why are time-lapse controls not in the recording menu but in the project menu? And so on and so forth. This menu structure needs to be consolidated into a simpler hierarchy, and it needs clear, industry-standard naming conventions. And just look at ARRI menus on their website. There's just no reason why a $6,000 camera should be harder to operate than a $60,000 camera. In a lazy attempt to somehow remedy the menu situation, Sony came up with a touchscreen quick menu that is borderline useless. First of all, it hinges on you using the stock monitor for touch controls, which are not very responsive, by the way. You can't edit this menu, and there are 10 pages of it with a bunch of settings that you can't actually change. The only truly useful page here is the audio monitoring, which allows you to clearly see 4 tracks of audio. That is, of course, if you can get 4 tracks of audio, but more on that later. In closing of the menu rant, I would say that most FX6 users come up with their own custom menus and their own user buttons, and thus the UI of the camera ceases to be an issue after the first couple of days. But that doesn't mean that we can't have great UIs like Blackmagic or Red cameras or small HD monitors. Sony really needs to up their game in this department. And same goes for remote control apps. We need really robust camera control apps, preferably for iPad, with multicam support, settings transfer, rec control, etc. In an ideal world, I'd be running an FX6 and a couple of FX3 from an iPad, controlling and monitoring the whole camera setup from one big screen. But that future is nowhere in sight. What's out there now from Sony is barely functional, and it's definitely not ready for professional workflows. Firmware-wise, the biggest omission on the FX6 is the lack of a 4K long GOP codec. There is technically an XAVC-L 4K option, but it's only 8-bit for some inexplicable reason. This codec is very much needed for talking head stuff, exactly like this, where I need the 4K because YouTube basically forces you to upload 4K. I want 10 bits for shooting in log, but I want the IPB compression for a sensible file size. I do a lot of long-form interviews, and this is my #1 firmware request, especially considering that the FX3, the younger model, doesn't have this limitation. The second most important request is the ability to bake in exposure index when shooting Cine AI. Now, I won't go into great details about this problem because there already is a great breakdown by Robert Machado, link below. Suffice to say that this feature was available on the FS7, but Sony for some bizarre reason decided not to include it in their new cameras. Anybody who is handing off footage that's been purposefully overexposed needs this feature. My third request is a better white balancing feature. The one on this camera is incredibly imprecise and cumbersome to use. It takes me at least 3 tries to get a decent white balance reading. We need a movable box like on the FX3. Next thing is a bug in my opinion. When you set HDMI output to display a lot, the onboard waveform monitor starts showing you the signal after the LUT. First of all, I see no reason why these two things should be connected at all. But more importantly, I never want to see a post-LUT waveform. I only ever want to monitor the log waveform to see if I'm truly clipping or not. I would very much like to see an open gate mode. I seriously doubt that Sony will ever do that, but I'll ask anyway. Please let us use the whole sensor, even if it's just for real-time frame rates. There are a bunch of new affordable full-frame anamorphic lenses on the market that use something like a 1.5 squeeze ratio, and a 3x2 sensor is just perfect for that. This will go a long way to making this a cinema camera in actuality. The big downside of this camera compared to the FX3 is that it doesn't work with DJI gimbals. No rack stop, no shutter control, no focus or zoom, nothing. There's multi-year thread on the DJI forums that basically boils down to this: it's never gonna happen. Now, I'm totally speculating here, but it seems like it would require some extra work, some API or something on Sony's part. Again, it seems like the whole OS of this camera was copy-pasted from the old PXW line, and there's just no support for modern features like gimbal control. Sony really needs to get their shit together when it comes to software, and they need to put their camera teams in the same room. It feels like some of this camera was developed by the Alpha team, and some of it was developed by the PXW team, and they never actually talked to each other. Sony are great engineers, there's no denying that. But the software and the UI have been their weak spot for years. Alpha cameras are a little better in this regard, and that's why my FX3 here worked with gimbals right out of the gate. Okay, last but not least, I want audio in the S&Q mode. Canon C70 does it. I see no reason why you can't record audio into a separate file. This is a major basic utility and it needs to be added. Oh, and let us rebind this useless flag button. It's only relevant for Catalyst Browse, and let's be honest here, who used that? Now let's talk about the elephant in the room. If you thought I was peeved before, then this is where the real rant begins. The FS5, the predecessor of this camera, had one XLR input in the body and one in the handle. Not ideal, but workable. On the FX6, however, all the audio inputs are on the handle, so no handle, no audio.
No ticky, no laundry.
So that already kills the modularity of this camera. And combined with DJI incompatibility, this makes the FX6 a no-go for gimbal use. If you are shooting mostly from gimbal, just straight up don't buy this camera, get the FX3 instead. But it goes deeper than that. There's no 3.5mm jack on this camera, which is so moronic it boggles my mind. And don't tell me there isn't enough space for a mini jack. This camera has 3 redundant ports: the 2.5mm Lang port, the stupid Sony multi-USB port that is useless, and a USB-C port that God knows why is away from the rest of the aisle. Now, the whole 3.5mm gate goes even deeper than that. Forget about the top handle for a second. There's no way to run 4 channels of audio into this camera, besides the MI shoe. Your only option is to buy into an expensive and niche Sony's UWB-D system that will run you $1,300. Compare that to $300 for something like Rode Wireless Go 2 that is compatible with any camera. None of those affordable dual wireless systems that are hot on the market can be used on this camera for channels 3 and 4. At first, I thought this was greed. It wouldn't be first time where a company creates a problem only to sell you their proprietary expensive solution. That sucks, but at least I can understand that. But that's clearly not the case here, because the alpha cameras have no such problem. The cheaper cameras in Sony's lineup run 4 channels of audio, no problem, with 3.5mm jack. And their goddamn XLR K3M module, which is basically the same thing as this handle, has a 3.5mm jack in it. Sony, what the f***? Where is 3.5mm jack? When I raised this issue on the Facebook group, I was surprised to find some people actually defending Sony, saying a 3.5mm jack is not a professional connector. What are you smoking, people? It's the single most ubiquitous audio connector on planet Earth. Canon's C500 Mark II that is 16 grand has a 3.5mm jack. Are you gonna tell me that it's not a professional camera? And Canon's C70, the main competitor to the FX6, has a 3.5mm jack and both XLRs on the body. None of that top handle BS. What kind of a degenerate would applaud a company for taking away their options? It's like a bully is taking away your lunchbox, and instead of hitting him, you say thank you. It wasn't a professional lunchbox anyway. But most of all, I'm pissed at Sony for doing jack shit about this issue. When I got this camera, I was sure, really sure, that they would fix this embarrassing fault. They could have added support for 2 channels of audio through a standard USB-C dongle. That would be the easiest solution, but then again, it would require software engineers, which Sony apparently doesn't employ. Then they could have sold some kind of miniature adapter for the top handle port and make money off of basically every FX6 user out there. But nope. Lastly, they could have opened the top handle port spec to third-party developers and let the community solve this issue. And Sony did none of that. They did absolutely zilch about the most glaring issue with this camera. Instead, in the coming firmware, they're adding anamorphic D-squeeze for this camera. I guess so you can look through your Panavision C-series from your 720p 3.5-inch display. Sony really dropped the ball on this. Now, I needed a big camera anyway, so I bought the FX3 that works great with a gimbal and runs 4 channels of audio just fine. So I guess good job Sony, taking a page straight out of Canon's playbook and selling me a second camera to fix the one I have. As a closing thought, greed I can forgive. I don't like it, but at least I get it. Stupidity I cannot forgive. And the lack of 3.5mm jack on the FX6 is just plain stupid. You can't explain this away. Now, to circle back to what I've started with, I love this camera. The combination of the sensor and the ISP is just unbeatable. There's just nothing on the market under 20 grand that beats this camera. It has a hypersensitive full-frame 4K sensor with basically night vision mode. Blazing fast sensor readout speed that rivals that of an Alexa. Best codec in the business that hits the sweet spot between image quality and practicality. Hands down the best ND system in the industry. It's borderline magical. Affordable media and batteries, sensible power draw, all very practical. Great autofocus and all of the other auto features. From exposure to mic levels, all great assists for solo shooter. And tremendous reliability, by the way. In 2 years, I've never had it crash, freeze, or restart, even in cold, dusty, and wet environments. Again, a true workhorse, a solo shooter's wet dream. And in hindsight, all of the issues that I've talked about are not deal breakers, not for me at least. You can work around them. And there's no perfect camera, of course. And that's subjective anyway. Perfect for what? And for my needs, This camera came so close to perfect that it just makes me sad to see it fail millimeters before the finish line. 3.5 millimeters to be exact.